first off, just high level thoughts on this quarterback class. Like just like the biggest one takeaway to think about with this quarterback class, in your opinion.
Hey, Mike, good to see you. Draft lab, I like that. I should have stole that for with the first pick. I didn't bring my lab coat, so we'll pretend this is my black lab coat. I'll be the bad guy. You can be the good guy. Overall draft sort of perspective, 30,000 feet of this quarterback class. It's better than the 2022 class. That's how Kenny Pickett as the first quarterback off the board. It's not even close on paper to what we saw last year. Now, look, obviously things can change. Guys can come out of nowhere, have a few Brock Purdy's in this draft class. We'll have a different conversation. But I think it's going to be an issue where demand outstrips supply, and that could encourage some teams to perhaps overdraft. And we saw in 2022 that teams did a pretty good job of understanding what the quarterback situation was in reality, other than Brock Purdy, but at least with the first 5 or 6 guys. So we'll see how that shakes out. I'm excited about Cam Ward. I'm even excited about Shedeur Sanders, although it feels like the hype train is about to go over the cliff, and I'm going to try to guard against that. But there's some guys in this class that I think could sneakily end up being good players, and I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah, I think that's my take as well, that it's not bad. It's not bereft of talent. There are guys that could be franchise quarterbacks, and there are also like more names than just the top 2 that get talked about. And Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. There are a few more guys who would not surprise me if they became NFL starters. Now, I think the biggest thing this class compared to last year's class is there's not the high end. Last year just had guys with absurd tools, guys who had been, early in their career, high end players. This class doesn't have quite that, but it does have talent nonetheless. So let's get to my quarterback rankings. I'm going to go through my top 10 here. You give me your thoughts after I break this down, but I'm going to you see it on the screen there, 1 through 10. I'm going to kind of put where I would draft each of these guys in terms of my grid. So Cam Ward, I'm very high on. I just think his physical capabilities are different than anyone else in this draft class. It's what the high end at the position in the NFL looks like. Even if he's not a polished product, I'm taking that guy top 5. So I have a top 5-ish grade on him. It's not as high as the grades of the guys who went 1, 2, 3 last year, but it's still, that was a unique class, right? We saw how those guys fared. So it's still not too far behind those guys. Shedeur, though, it's a leap after this. After Cam Ward, it goes Shedeur, Dillon Gabriel, and Jaxson Dart. My 2, 3, and 4 are all top of the second round grades for me. It's not guys that, if you draft him in the first round, in the 20s or whatever, I'm not going to complain any of those guys. But it's not to the point what I saw on tape that I'm willing to pass on, top 10 picks where you should be getting a cornerstone type of piece for your franchise. I'm not sure I'm willing to pass on those sort of talents for guys like Shedeur Sanders, Dillon Gabriel, Jaxson Dart. But I think they're more than capable quarterbacks that could develop into stars at the next level. I just have questions about where the ceiling for all 3 of those guys goes. That's why I have them a good tier behind Cam Ward. After that, we're taking another leap from 5 and 6. Quinn Ewers, Tyler Shuck, the Texas quarterback and Louisville quarterback, respectively. There's things to like about their game. I still think they're day 2 quarterbacks, but they're more third rounders rather than second rounders. And then after that, my 7, 8, 9, 10, Kyle McCord out of Syracuse, Jalen Milroe from Alabama, Will Howard, Ohio State, and Curtis Rourke from Indiana. Those are all day 3 guys. So that's the kind of how I tier it up. And Jalen Milroe is the one in that where it's like, you almost take him out of this quarterback class entirely in his discussion about what he is, because it's so reliant on his legs and what he can do as a runner, because he's special in that regard, not special as a passer just yet. I mean, if you just put him as a passer, stacked him up against the rest of these guys in this class, like he's so far and away dead last. It's just like he's not there as a passer, but you don't have to be when you can run as dynamically as he is. So it's a little bit of a different animal, him. But I'm going to give you the floor now. Who's too high, who's too low, and who's just right in my quarterback ranks?
So this is a great list, and I love it. And I have to guard against the sort of Twitter overreaction knee-jerk just because I don't love it or it's not my own. So I applaud you for being original. That's incredibly important. And the other thing, Mike, and I've talked to you about this before, we don't know. Dillon Gabriel could end up being the best quarterback in the history of football. We just don't know. So that you have him third, that's too rich for me right now, and that's more physical than anything. And I thought it was curious that you had him third, even though you're big on physical traits. So he's 5'10", just shade over that. I don't want to steal him up that
5'10.5".
quarter inch. 10.5, thank you. I think he's 200 pounds, has 9-inch hands. So he's a full 1.5 inches shorter than Tua. His hands are 1 inch smaller. Tua had huge hands at 10 inches. And he's not Tua in terms of the speed with which he plays and processes. but that's okay. I mean, we have time to figure this out, and he has gotten better at each and every stop. I think he played for almost all 200 plus college football teams by the time his career was over. So he's a little too rich for me. Like, I would not take him on day two, and that's strictly because of measurables. If he were 6'2", I wouldn't push back at all. So those 3 inches in terms of the height scare me a little bit just based on history, because history is Bryce, Kyler, and Russ Wilson. And, you feel okay about Kyler. Maybe you feel a little better about Bryce. Russ was in the right system and made it work for a long time. But who are you getting with Dylan?
Yeah, truthfully, that's obviously like the bucket. There's not many other guys in that. I think you can throw in, though, 6-footers into that mix. I mean, it's 1.5 inches. You're pretty close at that point. Guys like Baker Mayfield, guys like
in that case, I'm 6 feet, Mike.
Yeah, right. I mean, on Hinge profiles, everyone's 6 foot. So Baker Mayfield, though, like, I don't think it's too far off. And to me, he reminds me a little of Baker Mayfield because he's small, but he has a really good arm. I mean, I think from post his knee injury, you saw him come out at UCF back in 2019 as a true freshman, went for almost 4,000 yards. This was a guy who, like, day one was an elite player in college football. Every single stop along the way, from UCF to Oklahoma and then to Oregon, the guy played high-level football. And I think his gruesome knee injury that robbed him of a lot of what made him special as like an athlete and as a runner, it forced him to actually play quarterback more, and it forced him to get his lower half stronger. And I think you had a much stronger arm later in his career at Oregon now at 24 years old than you saw early in his career. And to me, he's a guy that's played a ton of football at this point. Like, he has so much experience and done it so well that I could see him being a Brock Purdy. I don't see high end. I think with all the short guys, you worry about what they can be at the high end, but I'm not talking about high end investment. I'm just talking about a guy who, I think if we had a do-over, we would all take Brock Purdy in the first round. I think that's the kind of player you could be getting in Dylan Gabriel, just because he's been such a gamer throughout his career. So that's my argument.
No, fair enough. And I won't push back on it. I'm glad that you zigged when most people zagged, and I appreciate that. By the way, you want to guess who I'm too low on your list?
I think I have it pretty good. Did he go to your alma mater, maybe? Syracuse?
I didn't go to Syracuse, but I live in Syracuse, so I got to rep the brand. Yeah, Kyle McCord. So
no William and Mary. Charles Grant. We'll get to Charles Grant when we talk about OTs. Then we'll get to
Charles Grant in a little bit. But yeah, so tell me why Kyle McCord's 7, because I thought he outplayed Will Howard for 98% of the season.
That's valid. I think, one, he is ahead of Will Howard on my list, so I think he is the better quarterback here. 2, honestly, like, if you want to put him a little higher, I'm not going to argue. I loved what I saw from him on tape this past year. I think he has the best anticipation of anyone in this draft class. I think he attacks down the football field. I mean, for a lot of these guys who are these pocket passers, you think of them as dink and dunk guys. That's not the case with Kyle McCord. But why he falls to 7 is because he is a pure pocket passer. Every single guy, 1 through 6, has more athleticism to their game at this point. So that's why he goes just low for me.
All right, fair enough. I get it. He will tell you he's a little better athlete than perhaps we give him credit for. The Stanford game, he had a long run, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr., his high school teammate, actually said, "I didn't know you were that athletic." So none of us knew. And the one last thing I'll say quickly, Jaxson Dart, I think you have him just right. And when I come on Jaxson Dart, I think he's a day 2 guy. I think if you're in the 2022 class, he's probably QB1. But I think sometimes in the last few weeks, months, we're trying to sell ourselves on Jaxson Dart being something other than what he is. And I think he is a really good player who's probably a day 2 prospect who has a chance to be a starter somewhere down the road.
Yeah, if there's one thing I do love about this quarterback class that it does not get talked about, I don't think it's gotten talked about enough, they've all played a ton of football. There's no guy on this list that hasn't been starting for at least 3 years. And outside of the top, let's see, we got to go all the way to 7. Kyle McCord's the first one who's not a 3-year starter. The top 6 on this are all 3+ year starters, some of them 5+ year starters. So there's experience here. So even if you're drafting some of these guys on day 2, like Jaxson Dart, I think there's a good shot that they could still come in and maybe start for you. So if your team, like the Giants, like the Browns, like the Raiders, and you don't love the top of this quarterback class, I don't think this is crazy year to draft a second rounder who could be in like that Andy Dalton model, who could then start right away for you. There are second rounders in this class that could start right away.